What's up, everybody? Welcome to another special IG Live. Today, our special guest is Lucy Flores, the founder of Luz Media, Luz Collective. She's a lawyer, former politician, former Nevada State Assemblywoman from 2010, 2014. One of the first, if not the first, Latina elected official in the state of Nevada, where I live now. I've been living here since 2016. She was raised here. I think she was born in California, but she was raised, went to high school here, and got her career started here in Nevada, in Las Vegas specifically. And she just has I know of Lucy, and mostly I first know of Luz Media, Luz Collective, right? They're just this positive outlet, platform, media group on, here she is, on social media, always posting things about Latinas, like all about Latina empowerment, so I've been following them for a while, and the idea came up at Futuro Media to bring Lucy on and talk to her, and I was like, well, heck yeah, hell yeah, you know what I mean, like, and just learning more about her. She has a very interesting past and background, super inspirational, especially for somebody like me who has a rough past too. So let's bring her on. Here she is. She's going to be on the Luz Media account. Thank you guys for joining us. Didn't do any promo beforehand, but obviously people know the name, know
Oh,
Luz.
hola, Hector.
Hey, Lucy. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Same here. I didn't want to interrupt all the amazing things you were saying. I was like, by all means, continue.
No, I mean, you're an impressive woman, an impressive person, right? I'm in Vegas, and so I came here in 2016, and so I missed,
Ah, my
your
last
epic
race.
career,
My my that was the 2016 primary, my last elected race, yes.
right? But just reading about you in in the run up to this chat, you have an interesting story, and like I was saying, it's interesting for people like me. I think we come from similar areas. I saw on I think it was on the about for Luz Media, you say you grew up in a neighborhood that had more gang members than school counselors. I
That's
felt
right.
that. I
Yep,
felt that.
that's right. Yep.
Um, and so we'll get into a little bit about that. But I like to let guests introduce themselves. Even though I gave you a glowing introduction, I like people to introduce themselves and let people know a little bit about you before we start chatting.
Yeah, of course. Would love to. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. The Latino media space is just so small. And really, like, I've always been a part of being kind of the underrepresented in all these spaces, whether it was politics or media, et cetera. And so, like, the core of who I am is that I fundamentally believe that we have to support each other. We have to uplift each other. I mean, that's literally why I founded Luz Media, right? And so obviously being able to collaborate with you, talk with you, cross-pollinate our audiences, all of those things, is really a privilege because unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen that much, but we could talk about that as well. But as far as
I'm sure we will.
as far as my background, though, you mentioned a little bit. I actually started out in politics. I was elected to the state legislature in Nevada. Me and three of my colleagues, the first Latinas ever elected to the state legislature in the history of Nevada. I was actually still in law school when I decided to run for office. So somehow I managed to win, and I served almost a decade, either in elected office or running for office in Nevada. And from there, I really started to recognize again, like how powerful it was to be a person from such an underrepresented community in these spaces, and like how much more meaningful but also necessary that was, right? It was like, and stressful too, because it's not like you're the person that has to speak for 60 some odd million Latinos, right? But you kind of end up being put, like, you feel like you're in that position. And so I realized the power of narrative, the power of representation, the power of telling our own stories, of empowering our own voices. And eventually, when I ended up losing my primary election, a very high profile election, in 2016. I was very much a progressive before progressives were a thing, if they're even a thing now. So the
Ouch.
establishment, yeah, we can get
Yeah.
into that too.
Yeah.
But the establishment was not on my side, and several $1 million were spent to defeat me in a Democratic primary, and that was accomplished. But then I decided I needed to go in a different route, and that's what led me to media. I landed at Me Too. When the co-founder, Latina, Beatriz Acevedo, was still there. And it was really such an incredible experience to, again, be able to learn not just kind of the front end, being like the vocal advocate, but understanding what we call, the background, the back end, the behind the camera, if you will. And again, just seeing how critically important it was for us to not only have our voices out there, but then to also be able to own and control the platforms by which we are telling those stories, right? There's one thing to be a person that has a platform, but that's on some white-owned media network that's constantly policing what it is that you can say and who can say it and at what time, and really being those gatekeepers for us. So when I ended up leaving Me Too, I decided, well, Latinas, specifically us women, we are the backbone of so much of the success of media in general. And I saw who was driving engagement and who was driving the creativity, even, within the company. And unfortunately, there weren't many senior women, but the women that were producing and were actually creating and doing the things, like those were women, right? Those people were women. And I just thought to myself, Latinas, as a group, right, as women, we are even more underrepresented when it comes to media and even within the Latino collective. And I just thought, okay, well, I need to launch my own media company that focuses just on us, because we deserve that. And easier said than done.
Yeah.
I was like, I joke around and I tell people, like, I really enjoy doing easy things. I always choose the path of least resistance. And yeah, that is literally not what I chose. And yeah, it's been a journey. It has been a really, really long, sometimes very painful journey in keeping Luz alive. I've gone through some pretty epic personal issues these last couple of years as well. And yeah, it's been a journey from beginning to current, but anything that's worthwhile is worth doing. So here I am.
Speaking of journeys, I mean, you're talking about you. It's funny that you said, you take the path of least resistance, because from what I've read about your life, you do not do that, right? You always go against the current. I mean, I was just reading the profile of you when you first got elected as a state assemblywoman, talking about your teen years, adolescent years, right? It starts with, you're in a high-speed chase, 14, you stole the car to go on a beer run. And the path of least resistance from there would have just have been, like it was for me, just become a ganguero, right? Like everything you see around you, right? Going to college is, like my whole family went to my mom and my dad and my brother went to the military. I went to college, and I always say that was my own war, but yeah, I mean, you go from, going to juvie, probation, dropping out of Rancho High School, and then you're, fast forward, graduating with a law degree from UNLV and running for state assembly, woman in the same year. You become that. You're, co-chair, vice chair of the Nevada Hispanic Legislative Caucus. Then you become assistant minority whip. You lost to somebody in 2016 who, karma's a bee, right? So he didn't have the best career, right? His career ended, however, in allegations of sexual allegations and stuff like that.
Correct.
But you didn't take the path of least resistance, and you talk about how there was one, I guess, probation officer parole officer could have come down hard on you, and there's a lot of people who are who like to flex their power and be cruel to people, especially young people, anybody, right? Powerless people. This person saw the potential in you and was like, use your head, like use your brain to become. And I feel like you talk about how you were, in gifted programs before that, right? When you were in elementary school, but like, so you heard that your whole life. Why did that at that moment, why did that click for you?
I think it's really important for me I always try to highlight this first and foremost, is that part of my motivation comes from recognizing that systematically as people, we are tracked into the school to prison pipeline, into not obtaining any kind of additional education, et cetera, et cetera. And that statistically speaking, we can now, based on research and data over many, many years, we can now almost in the 80-90 percentile range, we can predict where someone is going to land in their life based on their zip code, like literally down to their neighborhood. And so the percentage of people who defy those odds is so small. And frankly, what is wrong with the entire system, the way in which it's operating, right, in the United States. And this is like all the systems, the educational system, the economic system, et cetera, institutional racism, et cetera, all these things. And so I like to emphasize that because for a long time, I did kind of do this bootstraps narrative, like, if you just believe in yourself, you can do it. And that part is still true. However, there is that part that has to acknowledge those challenges and those obstacles. And if there isn't some sort of moment that creates an alternative path for you, it is very unlikely that you're just going to wake up one day in those conditions, in that environment, and say, hey, I think I could do better, right? Like, that's just it's not realistic. And even sometimes seeing other examples, whether it's on TV or whatever, sometimes that's not even enough, because you need something else. You need mentorship, you need support, you need people to believe in you, like you need all of these things. And I was really fortunate to have gotten that at a time that I really needed it. So my parole officer, I talk about this moment where I had been in and out of being incarcerated since I was 12 years old. I was tracked into the school to prison pipeline by a statutory offense, which basically means it wouldn't be illegal if I was an adult. So things like running away, ditching school, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, instead of being sent to a counselor or someone who cared, or, I was just arrested, handcuffed, put in the back of a police car, fingerprinted, mugshotted, shackled, put in jumpsuits, right? Like what you would do if you actually committed a major crime to a child. I was 12 years
Right.
old. So fast forward, you get to this moment where you've just been churned through this system, and you've been demoralized, and you've constantly being treated like you're nothing and like you're nobody, and like that's all you're going to ever be. And as a young woman, coming from a neighborhood where that's kind of all you also see. All of my sisters were pregnant as young teenagers. The belief system that I had for myself was that I was just going to be everything else that I saw, either a young welfare mom, either dead, ending up in prison, all these number of things, but none of them were good. And I ended up violating my parole. I was actually convicted to a long-term sentence in a juvenile detention camp, which is basically just a child prison. And I violated my parole after I got out because, of course, I'm being released into the same setting, same everything, same family, but expected to somehow do better.
Right.
And when I thought that my life was over, and that I was just really, I had accepted my fate at that point, that those were the things that I was going to become, this woman, she just shocked me. I was sitting there shackled in front of a judge. I was about 14 or 15 at the time. And I thought for sure that, I was going to get sent back, and that was it. That was my life. And she just made this amazing declaration that said, Your Honor, I recommend that Lucy Flores be released to her father. And that really was the first aha moment. Now, that wasn't the moment that just changed everything, because that doesn't happen. That's not reality. But it was this moment that I was just so like shocked and could not believe that I was getting a second chance, that she actually believed my version of the story, and she was just going to let me go. And it was that moment that I decided I have to do everything in my power to try to avoid my friends, not get caught up out in the streets. I wouldn't even walk to the convenience store because I was like, nah, homie, like, I'm not getting caught up in this. Like, nah, you know, and I would stay home. I literally was just so scared to accident, because you know how it is. It's, or maybe people listening don't know how it is. You just get caught up. You just minding your own business, walking down the street. And then, you know, some friends say, hey, come over here, do whatever. And the police roll up and it's over. You know what I mean? So it was like really, it was of course very stressful, but again, important to emphasize that I was lucky in many ways, because so many of my friends didn't get that person. And then after that, they didn't get the support that I got. And they didn't get the opportunity to have a dad who was still fighting tooth and nail to try to support me. And, you know, I told him I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go to the school that I was in. I wanted to go to Rancho, which at that time was like the normal high school, because I was in alternative ed for, like, you know, quote unquote, the bad kids. And my dad did everything that he could to try to support me. And again, like, not everyone has that. So that's just where it started. And I didn't end up getting a GED until I was 21 years old. And that's after 6 years of people just constantly drilling into me, Lucy, you could do more, you can do more, you can aspire, you can do these things. And because I'd been arrested so many times, like in my mind, you know, as a kid, I was like the smart ass that was always getting arrested even more than I needed to, because I was talking shit to the police officers. And, you know, and I'd be like, I know my rights. And they'd be like, oh yeah, you know, like, off to jail you go. But that planted this seed that maybe one day I could actually be a lawyer. And sure enough, you know, once I got my GED and started thinking that might actually could possibly be a reality for someone like me, I decided, like, you know, I'm going to be a lawyer. So that's what I did. And then I became a lawyer and I absolutely hated it. So there's that.
Well, I mean, you set a goal for yourself and you went after it, right? I mean, I saw that you did your undergrad in political science. I did mine in history, but really political history. And I'm wondering if, like you said it kind of, that, you know, you looked around and you saw, like, oh, all my friends, my family, their families, like, we're in this system, that we're in this physical area, this physical part of the city that is not being invested in, that is, everybody's being thrown away as soon as they're born here, right? And then you realize, oh, I'm in a system. And so you start to wonder, okay, what's the history of this system? What's happened to other people
Correct.
in other systems around the world? Is that what got you into political science and then politics?
You know, I think it was more because I didn't know anything. And so I was just doing, in fact, I ended up at the University of Southern California, go Trojans, on accident, because when I started community college, first off, I grew up about 4 blocks from the community college campus on Cheyenne, which you should know. But that's one of the local community college campuses in Las Vegas. And my entire life, I had no idea what that building was.
Wow.
No idea. I thought it was some sort of a government building every time I walked by it. That's what I thought. It looked very serious, you know? So I was like, that's like some sort of government building. And it wasn't until I was in my, you know, late teens, heading into my early 20s, that I discovered it was a school. But because I didn't know anything about school and nobody talked to me about that, I discovered by myself that it was a community college. And I was like, and like, I started, of course, changing my friends, and I had friends that were going to UNLV, and they would also tell me, Lucy, you should go to school.
Your friends are so important, right? I mean,
oh yes,
you know,
oh my God, yes.
There's the friends that help you survive, but then there's the friends that motivate you by what they're doing with their own lives.
That's exactly right. And that's what happened. And so they started to convince me that I should consider college. So I had already gotten my GED, but at that point, I had no idea how to get into community college. I just knew what I saw on TV. Like, I thought you had to do an application, and I was going to either get rejected, or I didn't realize like literally anybody could sign up for classes at community college. So once I figured that part out, then I was like, oh, well, I need to go to like a regular college, not a community college, but like a university. And I was just Googling around and found that USC meets, it said on its page, it meets 100% of your financial need. And literally the only thing that I thought was like, I got a lot of need and they meet 100% of it. We're a match, right?
Right,
So I
right.
literally applied to USC, like one of the most, one of the top schools in the country, and competitive to get into. I only applied to like 3 schools, and I got this acceptance letter from USC, and I was just like, holy shit, what?
Yeah.
How is this possible? And from there, it was just, it was, I think a lot of it was kind of, fate, because I just ended up in all of these places without really planning for it. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. What do lawyers study? They study political science. Okay, well, I'll sign up for that. And it just kind of went from there. I ended up minoring in psychology and law, which is the forensic application of psychology. That got me very involved and interested in wrongful conviction work. That is what ended up taking me back to Nevada, because the goal there was that I was going to launch an innocence project in Nevada, because Nevada did not have its own representation for claims of wrongful conviction. And I thought, that is a travesty, that has to change. And so, little by little, it was just because I started to realize how fundamentally unfair our systems were. This all happened when I was in college, and I started to learn, and kind of recognize, like, wait a minute, not everybody has it this way. What
Yeah.
does this mean? Like, what does this income inequality mean? Like, what? And yeah, and I just had a lot of pivotal moments in my development where I started to realize how important policy was. And one thing led to another, and ended up in the Nevada legislature lobbying for wrongful conviction reform because of the Innocence Clinic that I had started in my first year of law school. And, again, it just kind of snowballed from there. But that ultimately is what, again, started to give me this sense that not only was that important, but the way in which we are socialized, and that happens through media, as you know, right? Like, the way in which we are conditioned to see ourselves, to believe about ourselves, that informed my entire life. Like, the fact that I thought college was just a bunch of white frat boys drinking beer in a really nice house.
Or that college is a white thing,
And that
right?
college is a white thing. Yeah, like that informs what you think that you're capable of, or even where your place is in
Right.
society.
Yeah.
So that was all, like, there were so many influential moments, and I continue to be influenced in different ways, right? Like, and I think that is why ultimately I am so committed to, as you said, the not the path of least resistance, why I'm constantly landing on the path with the most resistance.
Well, I was gonna
Um,
say, I mean, you keep, I don't know if you notice this, but you keep downplaying your own rise, your own career. And like you said that a lot of it was fate, but there's a saying that, character is destiny. And you seem like somebody who's very thoughtful, somebody who didn't want, like me and my wife share this, and it's one of the things that we're very different, but we have this core thing where we just, from a very young age, did not want to be a statistic, right?
mm,
We just didn't want to be like everybody else around us. We saw what the system was forcing us into, year one of 13 kids, right?
right.
And you saw what was happening to your siblings. I saw what was happening to mine. She's one of 5 daughters. And we just wanted to be different. You probably felt different your whole life, you know? And the other thing I when you were talking about this, the parole officer, right? I mean, your mom left when she was 9, and I'm just seeing the I guess it's a parallel or a bit of ironic, whatever, that now you are the founder of this, like, pro Latina empowerment platform, right? And so it seems to me that I had a dad who left me when I was young. I'm his firstborn son. I have his name, and he left. That
Mm,
hurts.
yeah.
You
Mm,
somebody influence a parent can especially influence you by their absence as much as their presence,
absolutely.
right? And
Absolutely.
so I can't help but hear from your story that, your mom's influence by not being there, and then this woman in that courtroom saying like, I mean, what, sorry, I don't mean to, luckily you're the one with the minor in psychology. So like, what is it there, right? Is there something there, or am I just pulling shit out of my ass?
No, I definitely, actually, this is a really good topic to bring up because, trauma and mental health and getting the right amount of support that you need, and that we shouldn't shy away from talking about mental health and therapy and accessing as much help as we can get. I 100% am still working on my severe independence, if you will, because my mom did leave, and it was just my dad, and I had to grow up really fast. I was parentified, as we talk about a lot in Latino communities. When you're just a child, but you are now responsible for all of these adult things. Like, I became the mom of my 3 and 4 year old little brothers when my mom left, and obviously I didn't know what to do with that, and I rebelled, and I didn't understand why she left, all these things, right?
Angry,
And
get
so
angry
that,
at the world.
of course, yeah. Yeah. And, I managed to, of course, again, have these interventions that a lot of people don't get. And I'm very much where, and also as Latinas, this is something that we talk about a lot on Luz Media. We tend to also be conditioned by the patriarchy and the machismo and the idea of Marianismo, and that, women have their place. I mean, all of these things affect us, right? And so for me, I certainly was very much, I had bouts of PTSD that I wasn't even really aware that I had. I've been in therapy. I started therapy officially after my dad passed in 2020, which was literally one of the end of 2020, one of the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with. Losing a parent is always hard, but losing the one person, who is your person, that. And so I knew that I needed help at that point. Like, I needed additional support. And so when I started therapy, have just recently started again. And look, all of those things are, I think, really critically important topics that, as media platforms, as storytellers, Latino Rebels is very much news oriented, which is critically important. We need that as well. Luz Media is very thought leadership, as you mentioned already, empowerment, lots of think pieces, lots of first person and second person essays, etc. Lots of empowerment information, lots of resource-based information, lots of identity pieces. It is a culture and lifestyle brand, is the way that I describe it. And we are often talking about recent events and covering news type events, but we are very much focused on being a place for Latinas to see themselves and to see their experiences reflected, and to understand what all of those things can mean. And part of that is addressing these internalized conditions that we have been subjected to as Latinas, and dismantling that, dismantling it, demystifying it, destigmatizing it, and that starts with us. And so I've always been very transparent about my experiences. I've always been, when it matters is when I decide, okay, I'm going to say something about this. Obviously, I'm not talking just to talk, but I think there's just something so powerful in our ability to just be completely honest about our experiences and our thoughts, and that is so empowering for other people. And so when you start to see that, then of course, like, it's a perpetual circle, right? Like, you empower other people, and then you get empowered, and then, like, and
Yeah,
everybody gets empowered. So
yeah, yeah.
so yeah, I definitely am still working through this tendency to downplay my accomplishments. Thank you for
It's
pointing that
it's
out.
lifelong, right? I mean, it's lifelong. You're working on yourself forever, right?
That's exactly
Um,
right.
and yeah, at Latino Rebels, we do take, and that's why I think there's a kindred spirit with Luz Media, and that we're very intentional about our content. That we're not just going after eyeballs, right? Which is very easy to do,
That's
right?
right.
Talk about path of least resistance.
Yes.
Go for the eyeballs, right? Talk about the gossip, but like,
Yes.
you know, there's things like we try to cover Latin America. There's things that we won't cover a story like if there's some kind of narco violence, we don't cover that because it's like, why cover that? We know what's going on in Latin
Right.
America. Cover the good news. Cover the empowering, inspiring, hopeful stuff, right?
Right. Right.
Um, the one thing I was reading about when I was, you know, researching you for this chat was the whole fiasco with Emily's List, and which I think is interesting, and which I think, you know, for me, 2016 was a big moment in my
Yeah.
political development. You know, a lot of people went Hillary. I went Bernie. I'm still camp. If I'm not for Bernie, I'm in that camp, right? Whatever the next candidate is. I'm not in the establishment camp, but
Right.
it's. I read that Bernie sends out an email April 2016 saying, "Hey, give contributions to Lucy Flores in Nevada in her congressional campaign because she was not endorsed by Emily's List. Emily's List ended up endorsing Susie Lee, right? And the rumor, the scuttlebutt. Maybe you want to tell us how much that's true or not. The scuttlebutt was that it was because you endorsed Bernie. And I remember that year, right? It was like if you endorsed Bernie, if you were for Bernie, you were you hated women, you hated the Democratic Party, you wanted Trump to win, all this
Yeah.
stuff. Never mind that we wanted a revolution,
Right.
right? We wanted a social justice revolution. But you know, and then you become. Are you still on the board of directors for our revolution?
No, I resigned from there. I resigned from the board of Women's March. This was, I spent several years afterwards still doing national political work. My health scare and my health condition from last year is what ultimately made me pull away from all of my formal obligations in the political space. But yeah, I did spend a fair amount of time, several years, still working more on the progressive politics side of the work.
And so, I mean, we began this chat. You were saying, you know, progressive's still a thing. I mean, where is progressive politics now? I mean, we're getting ready for another presidential
Yeah.
election. You know, it's crazy. I feel like I'm one of those people
Yeah.
that I was critical of. When Obama was elected in 2008, I thought the world was going to change,
Same.
and then he ended up
That's
being
how I ended up running for office.
and then he ended up being the porter in chief and not doing anything for Latinos and making things worse even for Black America,
Correct.
right? And now Biden, 2020 came around, vote blue no matter who. Biden hasn't done anything in office. I don't even think he's awake half the time. And it looks like it's going to be either him and Trump, who's going to be in the middle of a trial, or him and DeSantis,
Oh
who's
God.
even more popular than Trump.
Honestly more dangerous, if that's
Yeah,
even possible. Yeah.
and we need a progressive candidate,
Yeah.
right? I think a lot of what Trump and Bernie showed this, that a lot of people who voted for Bernie in the primary ended up voting for Trump in the election, not because of everything stupid that Trump said, but because he was anti-establishment and what people thought Trump was, ended up being a lie.
He's
But
a master marketer.
right.
Right.
We need a real progressive party. Like I was just telling somebody yesterday that if the Democrats aren't for immigrant rights, if they're not for the working class, if they're not for what was the other thing I had mentioned? Oh, crap. Working class, immigrant. I mean, you name it. The progressive issues,
Environmental protection.
environment. That was
Yeah.
actually the third one. If
Yeah.
they're not for those three things, we don't have a progressive party. There's no left in this country.
Correct.
I mean, what do you see things at right now?
Well, okay, so this is a little bit of a complicated and longish position. I am the eternal optimist. People would ask me all the time, Lucy, how do you continue How do you continue in politics? How do you continue fighting the good fight? How do you do these things? And I always used to say, listen, even if the change that we see is small, if it's headed in the right direction, then I feel it is my obligation to continue working on that, because eventually we're going to see that grow. This is not a short game. This is a very long game. And the perfect example of that is the extreme right. They have played the long game on all of these issues for decades. They have just been smarter than us, more committed than us, and all kinds of other attributes that they have that we don't, right? Some of them very bad, right? Their commitment to lying, their commitment to, like, they will bold face, and we've seen this many times before, defend something they know to be false, right? Democrats don't do that. And rightly so. I don't necessarily think that we should do that, right? But you really
or they'll be against, or they'll be against a candidate, or they'll be against a person that's against everything they believe in, like Trump. Trump is not a conservative in any religious, economic sense.
Exactly. And so going back to actually related to why another reason why Emily's List cited that they did not endorse me despite me being the entirely aligned candidate, and that they had previously endorsed me before, it was related to protecting the establishment, but it was also related to money. And when Citizens United passed, this is the case that said that all money was basically, essentially all money was now acceptable in politics, right?
Corporations are people.
Corporations are people, corporate money, you know, there you could establish super PACs, etc. That really was the beginning of the decline of our democracy as we know it. And the reason why is because you need money to win. That's just the reality of it. As a candidate, if you cannot raise money, you are very unlikely to win. So, and that's just because of the nature of campaigning, right? If you can't communicate, if you can't put out ads, if you can't have staff, et cetera, right? You need to pay for all this infrastructure. So, you know, fast forward to where we are now is that Emily's List and my support of Bernie really was it was a punishment, but it was also a signal that if you're not with us, you're against us. And that happens even to this day to a lot of progressive candidates. That being said, we are seeing gains and we are seeing wins. And so that is the hope that I continue to hold on to for this country. Now, maybe, you know, maybe that's going to pan out and maybe it's not. I have no idea, because at this point, the economic imbalance and obviously what Bernie has talked about for a very long time, the income inequality is getting significantly worse throughout the world, not just the United States. And we see this destabilization of democracies that are occurring because of this massive income divide. We know, for example, that crime rates are related to income inequality. It's not about how much you spend on police. In fact, we see that the more that we spend on police, the less impact, in fact, the increase in crime that we see in many instances, right? So the data doesn't match up. What we see consistently across the board is that when there are steep increases in income inequality, you see a steep increase in crime. And that's freaking logical, right? Like, if you're going to steal to eat, or you're going to, you know, people do what they got to do to survive. And I'm not excusing people who commit crimes or violent things, and none of, right? We're not excusing any of it, but we need to understand what's fueling it. And so that's where we currently are, is we have this extreme inequality happening everywhere. And until we get enough people elected in office, the Greg Casars of the world in Texas, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, some of these people won on accident. You know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she did a wonderful ground game, et cetera, but at the end of the day, they treated her like nothing. And they literally fell asleep at the wheel, and they let her get through. And Greg Casar, on the other hand, was elected in a very progressive district. And so we kind of knew he was going to win, right? But we're starting to get these numbers, not just at the congressional level, but even more importantly right now at the local and state level. And so if we can finally build out that momentum, before this country crashes and burns, then that's what I hold on to. And that truly is going to be the only solution, because at the end of the day, what we're seeing now is that between the misinformation, the disinformation, the algorithms, the way in which, again, another reason why Latino owned media is so important right now, is because we have to be able to get true and accurate information, get past all of these firewalls, if you will, right? Whether it's from centric corporate Democrats, or the misinformation, disinformation, the Republican lies, all of these things, we're not going to be able to do anything about that until we're able to get our message out, and two, have enough people where we've now built some sort of momentum. And that just doesn't happen, over the short run. It doesn't. We're going to have to be very committed to electing people who have the courage to stand up to these very powerful corporate interests. At this point, we're very close to becoming an oligarchy, where it's just rich people and corporations running your government. Like, if we're not already there, we're very close to it.
Yeah,
I'm not a
I think we might
I'm not
be
a
there.
political scientist, but I don't know if the boxes are all checked, but a lot of them are checked.
Yeah, it's I mean, so many people talk about, living we're living in the dystopia that we always feared, in the movies in the 80s and 90s. I remember, the kind of dystopia they painted. It's almost like that, especially during the pandemic. It was like, wow. But yeah, I mean, I struggle with being an optimist, right? I think, F. Scott Fitzgerald says, he called himself a cynical idealist. That's kind of what I am, right? I'm a very idealistic person, but I'm also cynical. But then I think about what Baldwin said. He's like, they asked him if he's a pessimist or an optimist, and he said, I have to be an optimist because I'm alive.
I love it.
And if you're alive, you have to hope that people are that civilization and society is going to make it and advance. But the third thing, you cover a lot of ground. I could talk to you for hours. But yeah, getting people progressives have to vote in all elections, right? Because it's usually conservatives who are voting for judges, right? Who are voting for school board, the local school board, who are voting for everything. Yeah. It's ground up. And in a way, like, if you take care of the local government, if you stack the city council with progressives, and you stack, hopefully the assembly, Nevada's a kind of a pretty blue state. I come from Chicago, and I always thought it was like Yosemite Sam out here, but it's actually very blue. There's a little bit of Yosemite Sam out here, but it's pretty blue. But if you take care of the local, then the federal is kind of like a moot point. Who cares who's in the White House, right? And you saw that with Trump, where Trump's trying to push local governments around, and there was some very progressive local governments standing up to him. And so you have to progressive people out there vote in every election you hear about.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's plenty of case studies on this, right? There's plenty of examples. The $15 an hour wage, minimum wage, right? I was in the legislature when they were proposing that, and even I was like, there's no way. How are we going to get that? There's not enough support for that. And that started at Portland, was one of the first cities who implemented that at the city level. And from there, or maybe it was Seattle, might be Seattle or Portland, so I might be wrong.
Yeah, I think
Seattle was the first city that proved that you can pay people. And at that point, even 15 was barely a livable wage, right? It's no longer a livable wage because of inflation, right? Yeah. So it's not keeping up. Our wages are not keeping up with inflation. But, and again, the rich are getting richer, the poor are continuously getting poorer. It's getting bigger, that income inequality gap. But it's just such a great demonstration that one courageous city can literally inspire an entire movement, because they proved all of that, all of the hyperbole, the lies, the threats, all the businesses, the corporations. I'm not talking about small businesses. It's very different. But the major corporations that were trying to bully and do what they do best, which is just completely shut this stuff down in their own greedy interests, failed. And when that passed, everybody saw, oh, look at that. They were just bluffing. None of them left. None of them lost a bunch of money. None of them cut jobs. None of those things happened. Prices didn't go up, right? Like they're like, Tide is going to cost $10 if whatever corporation has to pay $15 an hour, and we would send them mailers, like grocery mailers, where certain different states had different tax brackets, et cetera, and sales tax brackets and all this stuff. And the price of Tide was exactly the same as the price in another state that was exactly the same price as another state, you know, and we would prove to them like this isn't affected at all. And so that's just one really great, I mean, those are the kinds of things that I hold on to, where we can tell ourselves, you know, one, this does matter. And so making sure that you're voting in that primary election, right? Those primary elections are literally the most important election for getting progressives and people with courage that are ultimately going to build this coalition and continue to fuel this momentum for the people. The most important vote that you can cast is in the primary election. And that's where, and obviously, you know, on the Republican side, they know that, so they get their people that they want in. They show up every single election. And so people look at their general election, you know, the Republican versus the Democrat, they look at those choices and they're like, oh man, this Democrat sucks, you know, and well, you had a choice, but that was an election ago, right? That was during your primary election. So there is, like, you know, people, they just, I think a lot of the times, they just don't truly understand how not just important it is, but the kind of impact that can have. And if we can readily give these super easy examples, this is the other thing that I love about media. I tell people that I'm just a translator. I've always been really good at being able to break down really complicated policy and you know, like technical conversations and say, well, actually, you know, look at $15 an hour and it didn't affect the price of Tide dishwashing laundry detergent at all, right? You know what did that? Voting in a primary and getting the kind of people, those progressives in that city council, to have a majority to be able to pass that. And just like that.
And progressives have to really, like right wingers do, like MAGA people do, is vote in the primary. Vote for the person that you want in office. Right. Don't vote for the person that's, you know, I want Bernie, but I'm going to vote for this person because they're safe, right? Because that's not what the other side does. Correct. And they get their person on the ballot, and that person sometimes wins. A lot of times wins. So vote your conscience. That's Don't right. vote the game, you know. But speaking of in voting, I mean, you have a media group. I'm an editor at Latino Rebels, but you sound like a politician. I know you're retired. Are you thinking of running again for office? I mean, you're still young. You're in the perfect position because you're young and you're like an OG too. You have this great career in politics. You have great ideas. Your ideas, everything that you're voicing, is more popular now than ever. Why not?
Well, I have not shut the door to elected office. I will say that. I love serving my community. That will always be in my DNA. It will always be in my blood. I owe my community, right? I owe people in these systems my life, really, when I think about it, right? And so my commitment to my career and everything that I do, and when I was in office, was if I can prevent, by something that I work on, that's something that I champion, that we can collectively reach together. If that means that even just one person, but if we can get it to affect thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people don't have to experience what I experienced, then that ultimately is what makes it, every last thing, worth it. That includes the online abuse, the online harassment, the death threats. When I was in office, I was kind of one of the first wave of people that experienced death threats because of a political stance. Unfortunately, that was when I talked openly about choosing to have an abortion. During legislative testimony, I was the first elected person to speak openly about my choice to have an abortion because it was my choice simply, and I was exercising my right. It wasn't because it was like some traumatic event, and those stories have their places, of course, but I was very unapologetic in the way in which I talked about my choice to have an abortion, which was like, it was just what I needed to do. It was my right, and I wanted to do it, period. And that resulted in like this global outlash
Well, I read that
of
you're
death
getting
threats
death threats and stuff like that. Yeah.
and harassment, and it was pretty incredible because, again, like, this was at the, social media was on the horizon, and everybody was using it, but it just wasn't to where it is now. So public officials, like, they experience death threats almost every day now. And so, there is a lot of challenges, but at the same time, I do feel really deeply committed to trying to leave this place better than we found it. I mean, it really is that simple. So I think for me, I love it. I love trying to help people. I love trying to leave my community a little better than I found it. But at the same time, I also recognize the emotional and the personal toll, and the professional tolls too that it takes on a person. And our system right now is not in a place where, if you're not independently wealthy, or if you don't have someone to support you, et cetera, like, I'm single, I don't have a partner, and so I'm fully dependent on myself. And I am very committed to building out Luz Media currently, right? Like, we need this platform. And so if that opportunity arises in the future, I may consider it, where I'm in a better place financially, support-wise, emotionally, all of the things. Then I
Sorry,
will
that's my
certainly.
dog.
Oh, that's okay. I think he's like. I think
Hey,
he's like
Benny.
supporting.
Yeah. He hates Amazon delivery people.
I think he's actually seconding what I'm saying. I feel like he's cheering me on. He's like, "Yeah, that's right."
I mean,
So
I'm cheering you on. I mean, again, like, I'm thinking about. I mean, I would expect, either Green Party or the Working Families Party to come tap you sooner or later. But maybe I should wrap this up while this dog's still barking. But any last words? You want to let everybody know where they can find you and Luz Media and the stuff that you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can find us, of course, on Instagram at the Luz Media. We just joined Threads like everybody else, so go follow us on.
Yeah, I mean, I
that.
just found out about Threads. It's like supposed to be the Twitter version or the IG version of Twitter.
It is 100% Twitter. The interface is entirely Twitter. The feed and the way in which it populates your feed is more of a TikTok algorithm. So you get served all kinds of stuff from people that you don't follow, and so you're just kind of seeing it is algorithm based, and so it's going to then start to learn what you're into. That part is a little scary because that's how we end up in confirmation bias and misinformation, disinformation. But it is 100% a Twitter alternative. I mean, look, we're experimenting with it, and so far it seems to be like a decent alternative, so we're going to stick with it for now. But yes, you can find Luz Media there on Twitter. Still, we are still on Twitter, although we're not as active, I think, as probably everybody else has been. My personal Instagram is Lucy Flores NV for my OG state, Nevada. And Luz, I hope folks will just go check out our content. We actually have a growing population, a growing audience of male readers. So that's been kind of nice, that we
I'm
have
one
our
of them. I've been
Latinos.
following you
Yeah.
guys for a while.
Our Latinos who are interested in all this content. And I think, like, a story is universal. And so the
Yeah.
more that people can learn about us, whether it's from a female perspective or not, the better off we're going to be. And that's literally Luz's goal, is to disrupt and dismantle false and inaccurate media stereotypes and narratives about the U.S. Latina experience. And that's what we're doing every day. So yeah, go check us out. And I hope that, Luz and Latino Rebels can figure out a way to do some more collaborations in the future.
I definitely hope we can do that. And I expect us to. But you know, I mean, Latinos are having a moment. I've been saying that
That's
for
right. Yes,
forever. I
that's
mean,
right.
and it's not going away because as somebody who was raised by a single mom, and you know, all I was raised by, you know, my tias were all divorced. My grandma's a single mom. You know, the fact that Latinas can do everything was just always, it's just common knowledge to me. It's kind of like, you know, what goes up must come down. And I feel like, you know, through a lot of, you know, generational fights, you know, now Latinos are being allowed to really flex their muscles, and the proof is in the pudding. Now, Latino men have to, you know, we have to get our shit together because, you know, the education rates aren't there and all kinds of stuff. But, you know, super proud of Latinas, and I think the thing I love about Luz Media is that you guys tell untold stories about
Yeah,
Latinas, right? And
that's
as a
right.
history nerd, I love that, right?
Yeah.
I love the more you fill in your understanding of the world, the better. But thank you so much, Lucy Flores, for coming on. I do fully expect us to collaborate. And I expect to see when you're running for something. You know, I'll be one of your first
Okay,
endorsements.
well, you better be one of my first donors too, because we talked about how important that money part
I'm
is.
gonna
So not
put my
only do I
money
need
where
an
my you got.
endorsement,
You got to put your money where your mouth is, for sure,
that's
for
right.
sure. Take care.
Well, thank you. This is amazing.
Peace.
Bye.